March 14, 1944. At 27,000 feet above Nazi-occupied France, 5 P-51 Mustangs of the 354th Fighter Group cut through the frigid air, their vapor trails marking their passage like chalk lines across the deep blue canvas of sky. Captain James Winters checked his watch with confident satisfaction. Their bomber formation was right on schedule, and German resistance had been surprisingly light. The men were certain this would be another routine mission, another step toward breaking the Luftwaffe's back. They couldn't have known that what they were about to discover would fundamentally alter Allied understanding of German air defense tactics and send shockwaves through Strategic Air Command. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the account of how 5 American fighter pilots uncovered a strategic deception that had been costing Allied lives for months, and how their discovery would transform the air war over Europe by exposing the uncomfortable truth behind the Luftwaffe's increasingly desperate defense of the Reich. The morning had begun like countless others at RAF Boxted in Essex, England. The distinctive rumble of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines filled the air as ground crews performed final checks on the 354th Fighter Group's P-51D Mustangs. The group had been nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, having been the first to fly the revolutionary aircraft in combat over Europe. Captain James "Jimbo" Winters, a 24-year-old former college football player from Nebraska, adjusted his leather flying helmet as he studied the mission map. His weathered face betrayed the experience of a man who had already completed 47 combat missions, far more than most pilots survived to achieve. "Doesn't look too bad," remarked Lieutenant Michael "Mickey" Cohen, a wiry Brooklyn native who had joined the squadron 3 months prior. "Escort duty to Schweinfurt and back. We've done worse." "Never underestimate Jerry," replied Winters, folding the map. "Those ball-bearing plants are priority targets. They'll defend them with everything they've got." Lieutenant Robert Gaines, a lanky Californian with a perpetual sunburn, approached the group. At 22, he was already credited with 4 confirmed kills. "Weather report just came in. Clear skies all the way to the target, perfect hunting conditions." "Perfect for them too," noted Lieutenant David Wilson, the squadron's most methodical pilot. A former engineering student from Massachusetts, Wilson approached flying with the precision of mathematics. The 8th lost 28 bombers on the last Schweinfurt raid. The 5th pilot, Lieutenant Thomas Jefferson Clark, known simply as TJ, remained silent, thumbing through a small notebook where he meticulously recorded observations from previous missions. The son of a Mississippi preacher, TJ was the youngest at 20, but possessed an analytical mind that often spotted patterns others missed. Colonel James Howard, the group commander and Medal of Honor recipient, approached with their final briefing. "Gentlemen, you'll be escorting Baker's squadron of the 91st Bomb Group, 24 B-17s heading to Schweinfurt. Intelligence reports decreased Luftwaffe activity in the sector. They're stretched thin, with the Russians pushing from the east. However, this target is critical to their war machine. Expect determined resistance." Howard paused, making eye contact with each pilot. "Your primary mission is protection of the bombers. Understood?" The pilots nodded. "Good hunting. Wheels up in 30. Ubin at 07:45 hours, the 5 Mustangs took off, climbing to rendezvous with the bomber formation approaching from the west. The B-17 flying fortresses appeared on the horizon, 24 aluminum giants, arranged in a tight combat box formation, their contrails stretching behind them like rigid white spines across the sky. "Pioneer Group to Fortress Lead. We have you visual at 2 o'clock high," Winters radioed. "Roger, Pioneer. Good to see you, boys," came the reply from Lieutenant Colonel William Heller, commander of the 91st Baker Squadron. "We're counting on you today." The combined formation continued eastward, crossing the English Channel under clear March skies. As they approached the Belgian border, the flak began, black puffs of deadly shrapnel appearing with mathematical precision around the bomber formation. The B-17s maintained their course, flying through the deadly field with the stoic determination that had earned them their Flying Fortress nickname. "Keep your eyes peeled," Winters instructed his pilots. "First bandits usually appear after the initial flak barrage." But the expected fighter interception didn't materialize. The formation continued deeper into German airspace, the flak intensifying, then fading as they passed beyond the range of one battery and into another. "Something's off," TJ's voice came through the radio. "We're 70 miles into enemy territory. By now, we should have seen at least a dozen 109s. "Maybe intelligence was right for once," Cohen replied. "Maybe they are stretched too thin." Wilson's voice cut in, "Or they're waiting for something." As the formation neared the industrial center of Frankfurt, radar warning equipment in the bombers began signaling approaching aircraft. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high, large formation," called out a B-17 gunner. Winters instantly responded. "Pioneer Group, spread and climb. Cohen and Gaines, high cover. Wilson and TJ with me to intercept." The Mustangs split into their assigned positions, engines screaming as they clawed for altitude and speed. Winters led his three-plane element toward the approaching threat, expecting to see the familiar silhouettes of Messerschmitt Bf-109s or Focke-Wulf 190s. Instead, what materialized from the thin clouds shocked him. "What the hell?" he muttered. Approaching at high speed was a formation of Bf-110 twin-engine fighters, aircraft that had proven woefully inadequate in the Battle of Britain years earlier and had since been relegated to night-fighting duties. Behind them flew a mixed group of older Ju-88s and even a few antiquated Do-17s, aircraft considered completely obsolete for daylight operations. "Are they serious?" Cohen radioed. "Those birds are sitting ducks for our Mustangs." The German formation made a single, almost half-hearted pass at the bomber formation. Their attacks seemed uncoordinated and easily repulsed by the B-17's defensive fire. The Mustang pilots engaged, expecting an easy hunt. Lieutenant Gaines closed on a Bf-110, lining up for a killing shot on the lumbering twin-engine fighter. Just as he prepared to fire, the German aircraft performed an evasive maneuver that seemed impossibly agile for its type, before diving away at exceptional speed. "What the hell?" Gaines exclaimed. "That 110 just outturned me." Winters experienced something similar as he engaged what appeared to be a Dornier Do-17, an aircraft so outdated the Allies had stopped encountering them over a year earlier. The supposedly obsolete bomber suddenly executed a tight defensive spiral that no Do-17 should have been capable of performing. "Something's wrong here," Winters called. "These aren't flying like any 110s or Dorniers I've ever seen." The German aircraft made another uncoordinated pass at the bombers, causing minimal damage before breaking off and retreating eastward. Not a single Allied aircraft had been damaged in the engagement. "That was bizarre," Wilson commented as they reformed their escort position. "Almost like they weren't trying." The formation continued to Schweinfurt, where they encountered heavy but inaccurate flak. The bombers delivered their payload on the ball-bearing factories with precision, and the return flight featured only scattered resistance. By all conventional measures, the mission was a tremendous success. All 24 bombers returned with minimal damage and no casualties. Yet as they debriefed back at RAF Boxted, the 5 Mustang pilots couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with what they had witnessed. "Those weren't standard Luftwaffe tactics," TJ insisted during debriefing. "The Germans don't waste fuel and aircraft on ineffective attacks, especially not with their fuel shortages." Colonel Howard listened intently as each pilot described the unusual performance of the supposedly obsolete German aircraft. "You're certain about what you saw? Bf-110s and Do-17s?" "Positive, sir. Winters confirmed, but they didn't fly like any 110s or Dorniers I've ever encountered. The performance envelope was all wrong. Intelligence Officer Major Raymond Harris entered the discussion. The Luftwaffe lost 43 fighters yesterday over Berlin. Intelligence suggests they're running short of both aircraft and experienced pilots. So they're sending up flying coffins as a desperation move? Cohen asked skeptically. Perhaps, Harris replied. Or perhaps there's something else going on. TJ had been unusually quiet, flipping through his mission notebook. Sir, he finally said, addressing Colonel Howard, I've been tracking our encounters for the past 6 weeks. There's a pattern emerging. He spread several pages of notes across the table. We're seeing increased deployments of obsolete aircraft types, but decreased effectiveness of German interceptions. Bomber losses have remained steady despite our improved escort coverage. Colonel Howard studied the notes. What are you suggesting, Lieutenant? I think we're being played, sir, TJ replied quietly. I think the Germans are showing us what they want us to see. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. After the debriefing, Colonel Howard ordered an unusual mission. The next day, Winters and his team would fly a special reconnaissance flight following a similar route, but without bomber support. Their objective was to observe German air defenses without engaging. Dawn on March 15th found the 5 Mustang pilots airborne again, this time flying at maximum range from each other while maintaining radio contact. They crossed into German airspace at different altitudes, simulating a dispersed bomber stream rather than a tight formation. Keep your distance and observe only, Winters reminded them. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. For 2 hours, they traversed enemy territory, encountering only sporadic and inaccurate flak. No fighters rose to challenge them. Then, as they approached the Rhine industrial region, TJ's voice crackled over the radio. Pioneer 3 to group. You need to see this. Coordinates Foxtrot Echo 7. The other Mustangs converged carefully on TJ's position, maintaining altitude separation. What they saw below confirmed their suspicions and revealed a deception of staggering proportions. On an abandoned airfield 20 miles east of Düsseldorf, dozens of aircraft sat in neat rows, but they weren't operational. They were decoys, elaborate wooden and canvas constructions painted to resemble Bf-110s, Ju-88s, and Du-17s. Nearby, actual Messerschmitt Bf-109G fighters, the Luftwaffe's premier interceptors, were carefully concealed under camouflage netting adjacent to the tree line. Son of a gun, whispered Gaines over the radio. They're showing us the obsolete stuff while hiding their real fighters. Pioneer leader to group, let's make another pass. Photos and confirmation, Winters ordered, activating his reconnaissance camera. As they circled for a second look, the camouflage nets below began moving. Within moments, 8 Bf-109Gs scrambled from their hidden positions, climbing rapidly toward the Mustangs. We've stirred up the hornet's nest, Wilson called. They're coming up fast. Break and evade, Winters commanded. We need to get this information back. No unnecessary risks. What followed was a tense cat-and-mouse game as the Mustang pilots used their superior high-altitude performance to evade the German interceptors. The Bf-109s pursued with determination but broke off as the Americans approached the edge of their range. They didn't want to chase us too far, observed TJ, as they regrouped. They're protecting something. Or someone, added Wilson thoughtfully. The reconnaissance photographs provided critical evidence, but it was what happened next that confirmed their theory. As they approached the French coast on their return, they observed an unusual sight. A massive B-17 formation under heavy attack by Luftwaffe fighters, but the engagement was happening at an unusually low altitude of 17 sovereign feet. That's the 303rd, identified Winters, recognizing the distinctive tail markings. Their escort must have been delayed or drawn off. "Look at those fighters," TJ said with growing excitement. "All FW-190s and late Model 109s. Not an obsolete aircraft among them." The 5 Mustangs dove to assist, but the German fighters immediately broke off their attack and disappeared, despite having a numerical advantage. "They're avoiding us specifically," Wilson realized. "They don't want to engage P-51s if they can help it." Later that evening, in a secured briefing room at 8th Air Force Headquarters in High Wycombe, General James Doolittle listened as Colonel Howard and the 5 pilots presented their findings. Intelligence officers and senior commanders sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. "So you're telling me," Doolittle said slowly, "that the Germans have been deliberately showing us obsolete aircraft while concealing their actual fighter strength?" "Yes, sir," Winters confirmed. "The decoys we photographed explain the unusual performance we observed. They weren't real BF-110s or Dorniers at all, but disguised BF-109s and FW-190s. Pilots were intentionally flying in ways that mimicked the flight characteristics of the older aircraft." TJ stepped forward with his analysis. "Sir, we believe the Luftwaffe has developed a strategic deception plan. They're creating the illusion that they're depleting their fighter force, while actually conserving their best aircraft and pilots for specific targets." Major General Fred Anderson, Director of Bomber Operations, looked skeptical. "To what end? Our bombers are still getting through." TJ continued, "By examining loss patterns over the past 3 months, we can see they're selectively defending certain targets while appearing to defend others. They're creating corridors where they want us to fly." He pointed to a map showing recent mission routes and loss rates. "Notice how bomber losses spike dramatically when we hit these 5 target types, but remain minimal elsewhere. They're channeling us away from something." The intelligence officer, Major Harris, studied the map with growing concern. These heavily defended targets include oil refineries, synthetic fuel plants, and aircraft factories, but these lightly defended areas are mostly ball-bearing plants and submarine pens, completed Wilson. "Targets we've been prioritizing based partly on their continued strong defense, which we interpreted as indicators of their importance." General Doolittle leaned forward. "Are you suggesting they're intentionally defending less critical targets to draw our attention away from the truly vital ones?" "Exactly, sir," Winters confirmed. "And our intelligence assessments of Luftwaffe strength and disposition have been compromised by this deception." The room erupted in discussion as the ramifications became clear. The Luftwaffe, rather than fighting desperately with diminishing resources as previously believed, was implementing a sophisticated conservation strategy, sacrificing certain industrial capacities to preserve others, all while creating an illusion of weakness that influenced Allied targeting priorities. "The fuel plants," Doolittle finally said, silencing the room. "That's what they're really protecting. Their entire war machine stops without fuel." Colonel Howard nodded. "The 5 targets with the highest loss rates all relate directly or indirectly to their fuel production and distribution network." Doolittle turned to his planning staff. "Gentlemen, we need to completely reassess our targeting priorities and expectations of resistance. The Mustang pilots have uncovered something that changes the entire air war equation." In the days that followed, 8th Air Force dramatically altered its strategic bombing campaign. Armed with the knowledge of German deception tactics, mission planners began targeting the previously well-protected fuel production facilities with overwhelming force, allocating maximum fighter escort resources to these missions. The change in German response was immediate and revealing. Faced with concentrated attacks on their most critical infrastructure, the Luftwaffe was forced to abandon its deception strategy and commit its reserves of fighters and experienced pilots. The result was a series of massive air battles that, while costly for both sides, ultimately accelerated the depletion of German air defenses. On April 5, 1944, Winters led his flight on escort duty for a massive raid against the synthetic oil plants at Leuna. As predicted, they encountered the full fury of the Luftwaffe's actual strength. Over 150 Bf-109s and FW-190s rose to intercept, confirming that the previous patterns of defense had indeed been carefully orchestrated deception. "They're coming up en masse," Cohen radioed as the German fighters approached. "I count at least 6 squadrons." "Remember the plan," Winters reminded them. "Force them to fight on our terms." The ensuing battle was fierce, with the Germans fighting desperately to protect the facilities that produced nearly 40% of their aviation fuel. The Americans lost 17 bombers and 11 fighters, but destroyed 38 German aircraft, many flown by instructor pilots hastily recalled from training units, further depleting the Luftwaffe's ability to generate new combat pilots. Most importantly, 80% of the bombs hit their targets, reducing Leuna's production capacity by more than half. Within 2 weeks, similar raids on other synthetic fuel plants had reduced Germany's aviation fuel production by nearly 70%. By late April, the 5 pilots who had uncovered the deception were summoned to London to brief Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder, Deputy Supreme Allied Commander. Their discovery had triggered a fundamental reassessment of the strategic air campaign that would ultimately play a crucial role in preparations for the coming Normandy invasion. "Your observation and analysis have quite possibly shortened this war by months," Tedder told them. "The Germans nearly succeeded in manipulating our targeting priorities through this deception. Now we understand why certain targets were so fiercely defended while others were left relatively unprotected." The meeting was interrupted when an aide delivered an intelligence report. Tedder read it quickly, then looked up with grim satisfaction. "Gentlemen, Signals Intelligence has just intercepted and decoded a message from Reichsmarschall Göring to Hitler. He admits that the Luftwaffe can no longer adequately defend German airspace due to critical fuel shortages. He specifically mentions our targeting shift to synthetic fuel plants as the decisive factor." For the 5 pilots, the confirmation brought a mixture of pride and solemn reflection on the cost of their discovery. Luftwaffe deception tactics had been successful for months, influencing Allied targeting and potentially extending the war, while thousands died on both sides. "What happens to us now, sir?" asked Winters. "You've all been recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross," Tedder replied. "However, the specific nature of your discovery remains classified. The official citation will refer only to exceptional service leading to strategic breakthroughs." TJ looked troubled. "So the Germans won't know that we've uncovered their deception?" "Precisely," Tedder confirmed. "We want them to believe we've simply shifted priorities, not that we've exposed their entire strategic defense concept. Operational security is paramount." As spring turned to summer, the 5 pilots continued flying missions, witnessing the steady collapse of German air defenses. The Normandy invasion proceeded with surprisingly little Luftwaffe interference. The German fighters simply lacked the fuel to mount effective opposition. During a mission in late July, as they escorted bombers to a target deep in southern Germany, Winters reflected on how dramatically the air war had changed since their discovery. German fighter appearances had become rare and brief, constrained by fuel limitations that forced pilots to engage only when absolutely necessary, and only for short periods. "Pioneer Group, bandits approaching 2 o'clock high," called Wilson, spotting a formation of Bf-109s climbing toward them. The German fighters made a single tentative pass at the bomber formation before breaking away. Their fuel reserves simply wouldn't allow for the extended combat necessary to effectively challenge the American formation. "They're running on fumes," Cohen observed, as the enemy aircraft disappeared. "While we're running on the truth," replied TJ. The discovery made by 5 observant Mustang pilots had exposed a sophisticated enemy deception that had manipulated Allied bombing priorities for months. Their insight led to a fundamental realignment of the strategic bombing campaign, targeting the true center of gravity of the German war machine, its fuel production capacity. This shift accelerated the collapse of the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force, ultimately saving countless Allied lives and helping shorten a war that had already claimed millions. In August 1944, Captain Winters received a letter from Colonel Howard, who had been promoted to Brigadier General and transferred to Air Force Headquarters in Washington. The letter contained a brief but revealing paragraph. Intelligence reports that German fighter production actually increased through July, despite our best efforts against their aircraft factories. Yet fighter operations continue to decline precipitously. Your discovery of their fuel vulnerability proved more decisive than anyone anticipated. The Luftwaffe now has planes, but cannot fly them, the perfect military paradox. The war in Europe would continue for another 9 months, but the Luftwaffe never recovered from the loss of its fuel production capacity. The 5 pilots who had uncovered the deception continued flying missions until Germany's surrender in May 1945, eventually completing over 75 combat missions each. Their story remained classified until 1973, when documents relating to the strategic bombing campaign were finally declassified. By then, the fundamental lesson they had uncovered had become doctrine in military planning circles worldwide. Sometimes the enemy's most vigorous defense reveals not what they value most, but what they want you to think they value most. The real genius of the 5 pilots wasn't just spotting the deception, but understanding its strategic implications. That the Germans were trying to influence Allied target selection by manipulating perceptions of defense priorities. In exposing this deception, they had demonstrated that in modern warfare, observation and analysis could be as decisive as courage and firepower. Years later, when asked about their discovery, Winters, by then a retired Air Force colonel, summed it up simply: "We didn't just learn what the Germans were hiding, we learned why they were hiding it, and that made all the difference." The discovery changed not just the course of the air war, but fundamentally altered how military planners would approach strategic deception and counter-deception for generations to come. It demonstrated that sometimes the most important targets are revealed not by how vigorously they are defended, but by how cleverly they are concealed. As T.J. Clarke wrote in his memoirs, published shortly before his death in 1997, "The Germans showed us what they wanted us to see. Our real achievement wasn't seeing through the deception, but understanding the strategic logic behind it. In war, as in chess, understanding why your opponent makes a move is often more valuable than seeing the move itself." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.